Coffee.
Margaret. Good morning, everyone. We're here to talk about a weighty subject, and my friend Len down here, who is the, as Margaret noted, is the Deputy Chief Medical Officer of the American Cancer Society, is also a cool blogger, and I respect that, someone who's out there connecting with people and taking ideas. And I guess what I'd like to just start with all of you, but Len, with you first, is just to ask yourself, when we're talking about cancer caregiving in communities, the first thing that comes to mind is, what do we need to do more of that we're not doing? What is not going right that needs to go right for this to be in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, and we're back in Tampa, we say, wow, we raised something here, we focused attention on it, and that's the kind of thing we need to see in communities across the country. So what's missing? What are we failing at?
Steve, that's a great question, and I don't know how many hours we have to answer it. So,
just think of yourself as blogging short form.
We've had the pleasure of doing this together. I will try to be brief. There are so many areas of quote attack or engagement. I mean, access is number one, but information, support, understanding. This is a world, and I'm sure we'll hear much more about this during the course of the morning. This is a world that is changing very, very rapidly at so many levels. It's changing at the level of how do we get information about the latest developments to the people who are actually giving the care? How do we get information to the community so they understand the care they're receiving? How do we make sure that the resources that are available in communities connect with the people who need those resources? And let me emphasize, it is not just the patients we're talking about, it's very much about caregivers as well. I have seen, again, I was going to say during my lifetime, but it's not even during my lifetime, it's during the last several years we've seen an increased awareness of the needs of caregivers, and I'm sure that some of you sitting in this room understand exactly what I'm saying. So access, information, making sure we get the latest, not only the latest treatments, but also understanding, and we're here talking about older populations, we understand our country is aging, and a lot of it's aging in place. Fortunately for some of us, we're aging well. Unfortunately for others, we're not, and how we learn the difference. So for this audience, perhaps, how we make sure people get the support and the care they need that's relevant to them, appropriate to them, and serves their needs, not some predetermined need of someone else that decides this is what you have to have as opposed to what you would like to have.
Rafael, you have commented that you also feel that many community oncologists are having a hard time keeping up with information. You were just talking about information and what's going on, broadly in society, and that's what drives them into specialization in their field as opposed to being the generalist that you think they need to be. And I'd be interested in just how you would diagnose this challenge of the unevenness in information. And before I jump to Monica, because I want to ask you about how to fix all this with an app. But what do you see as the deficits that need to be addressed?
Well, there's an explosion in technology and in knowledge, and the public is feeling it as much as we are. Just think of it, your phones, for instance. These little computers are becoming all types of devices for us, and likewise in medicine, the explosion on the genomic project that has led to treatments that are specific for cancers. Every week, there's a new drug being released, and it's hard to keep up with, just one area or two areas. In the medical schools, they more or less have the oncologists be devoted to breast cancer or colon cancer, but for the generalists in the out there in the community hospitals and setting, it's more difficult. So what you were saying is exactly right. How do we communicate all this information to the public? And there's a lot of advertising by the pharmaceutical industry, which I think is very beneficial, although there's some detractors about it. But we're all trying to educate each other. And the aging, I really think elderly means 85 and above. Middle age is 45 to 80, 85. And if someone takes care of themselves, the public they have to take care of themselves. Don't smoke, don't get overexposed in the sun, and this is the reality of where we are.
When you are in a system, and I know that you work with a whole big group of oncologists, and you also know what's happening down here with Moffitt and everything, and this may seem like a facetious question, but how do you keep people in your mind as opposed to data and stats and charts and systems? How do you keep the human being that's going through this process top of mind?
I think that's the easiest part of my job, because I meet the individual and the family, and you become really part of a team with your nurses and with the caregivers, the support that they have. The hardest is when you have like a male that's up like 70 and doesn't have anyone to help, and they don't follow instructions, they don't keep their appointments. Those are very difficult, but in general, I think knowing a person makes it a lot easier. In some way, psychologically, it's also depressing when things don't go well.
Monica, you've coined this term older orphans. And I don't know if the 70-year-old you just talked about is an older orphan, but when you look at what you work on the AARP Executive Committee in Florida, and you look at these communities and the kind of caregiving arena, and I know you've tried to address it. So, again, back to the same question, if we come back in 2-3 years, what will you have fixed? Will we have to have another one of these?
We probably will.
You guys all want to have one in 2-3 years? We can do kind of a report card on how they've done.
Well, I think that to underscore what both these gentlemen have said, information is so important. And it's not just information on the patient, but information on their caregivers and what kind of resources they have around themselves. And that's why the elder orphan issue is so important in our community. We are some of the oldest communities in the nation. In fact, Sarasota is the oldest community in the nation. So what's happening here is 10 years ahead of what's happening in most parts of the country. So think of us as the experiment of what's going on, of cancer and aging in the community for the future. But what that means for us is, with all the people that have migrated down here, I'm one of them, you leave behind that natural support system that you take for granted when you stayed in your home community. And many of us have done that. So you don't naturally have that extended family, maybe your faith community, all those things that you were really anchored in. Now all of a sudden you have less of those things around you. And I think it's important when someone faces a condition like cancer or any kind of multiple chronic conditions even, I think it's important to understand what are their psychosocial needs, not just their medical needs, but psychosocially. What kind of system do they have around themselves? What kind of resources do they have? And that's where that elder orphan issue comes in and so prominent, because they don't have that support system. They're here isolated, and often hiding in our community as well.
So we were talking in the green room a minute ago about how you sort of saw the caregiving community and how to build, I may be putting words in your mouth, but how to build efficiencies, how to create networks that didn't exist before. Take us down that path for a minute.
Well, there's one thing that happens to you when you become a caregiver. It changes you forever. That journey changes you, and what we've found is people that come out of that journey, they want to do something to help the next people that have to go through caregiving. Maybe it's a workaround they found for nausea, or maybe it's a special way of being able to record all the information so that they could really have a quick reference to it. But caregiving changes you fundamentally after you've done it. And so what we found are there's a lot of people in our communities that have ideas that can turn into companies that can serve our community.
Right.
And that's what we're doing, is we're helping them through the Caregiver Accelerator, and AARP is the funder for the Caregiver Accelerator, is we work with these companies in an 18-hour business course to see if they're ready to stand up as a company, and then we connect them with other resources in the community, maybe an investor, maybe someone that has a larger business that can help them along. But for us, we need to build an ecosystem in our community of transportation, of quick meals, of all different kind of, not just medical, but more of custodial care options out there in our community. And the best way to do that is to create jobs by creating companies that can help to do that in our community. And that's what we're doing.
So it seems to me, and I may have this wrong, that because cancer's been around for a long time, and communities dealing with it been a long time, but technology is helping that arena. But technology is also helping people live longer, so that the therapies that are coming in, and I'm interested, Rafael, in just this question of what technologies are making it easier for you to help patients achieve either longer life or what their objectives are as an oncologist? And Len, I'd like to know in a crystal ball, what else is coming down the pike? Like what will technology be able to do to be able to deliver it in the community so that this becomes a better story than just a horrible story? Rafael?
Well, basically, when I said the explosion in technology, it's based around the genetics of the cancer and finding targets that we have directly, and it's a lot easier than the traditional chemotherapy, less side effects, and much better success. So we've been doing the targeted therapy for
Not
lymphomas.
to interrupt, but how would you say the ratio is for chemotherapy now as opposed to immunotherapy and other genetic approaches?
The targeted therapy is going straight up while the chemotherapy is going down. That has happened in practically every malignancy with better results, less side effects. So immunotherapy is one of them, but also targeted agents that hit, say, a mutation with lung cancer, for instance, or breast cancer, lymphomas. We don't treat until we have the genetic information, the genomics of the tumor.
Len?
Steve, if I can for just one moment, I think there really are bifurcations on this issue.
Sure.
So there's one, the technology and science piece, and the other is, of course, the caregiving and the actual care piece.
Right.
And I, being in Tampa, I could not come here without giving a shout out to Moffitt Cancer Center.
Right.
And the reason I'm saying that is, I mean, the concept of understanding aging and cancer is not brand new. B.J. Kennedy, who was a well-known oncologist, addressed this back in the early 1970s and sort of started this, but Moffitt developed quite a reputation of taking a look at understanding aging and cancer and frailty and access to care. And I would call to your attention, if you're interested, National Comprehensive Cancer Network, which is a collaboration which Moffitt belongs to, has literally pages and pages and pages of information about the elderly and cancer and how to assess them. I will share, I don't want to be presumptive here, but I have a pretty good idea that not many oncology practices around the country, I'm not speaking about Florida cancer specialists, but around the country, are not addressing the assessment of patients to help determine with the predictive tools. So bringing that information...
Can you explain that to me for a minute?
Sure.
Help me get caught up with what that means.
So if you go to the NCCN website, and they have a very good discussion about this, it is literally pages and pages and pages of information and tests that are available that a physician, an oncologist specifically, could use to address the outlook for a particular person.
Right.
So when the 70-year-old frail 70-year-old walks in, it's not just saying, I think. There actually are some metrics that you can apply, and similarly for the 80 and 85-year-old, there are metrics you can apply. So it's not like the old days when we used to say 80 years old, not touching that person. One of the great slides in a blog that I put in a couple of years ago came out of ASCO of a 96-year-old lady who was put on a phase 1 trial of an immunotherapy drug with head and neck cancer and had a complete response.
Wow.
That was unheard of, that a 96-year-old would get anywhere near a clinical trial. So let's revamp our thinking about aging and cancer. At the same time, understand there are tools available. The technology question is, how do you get those tools to the point of care? When you ask the question about how we're going to address this, and I've seen it coming on two fronts now. Artificial intelligence is clearly playing a role. And it's going to play a big role. Not news. We've been talking about it for a number of years, folks, about how we need to do this. We're now at the point where we actually can harness that technology and make that happen, to bring the science piece to the table. But we also have technologies, that smartphone we're talking about. There are many companies, and I mean many companies, who are out there who approach us on a regular basis at the American Cancer Society to show us the opportunity for children who are remote to be interactive, to be able to monitor symptoms, to be able to monitor medications, to be able to step in because they want to play a role, but they can't be there with mom and dad. It's not perfect, but there are companies that are out there trying to assemble the knowledge to predict when somebody's going to be in difficulty, as opposed to waiting. And of course, the final piece to that is the payment system. And Medicare has put a big push and an emphasis now through a variety of programs to try to, number one, encourage oncology practices to look beyond the more traditional doctor-patient interaction Here, you have the, and I don't mean to make this, but for time purposes, here's the illness, here's the treatment, we give the treatment, come back in 3 weeks, to actually trying to provide better facilities for people to be cared for. But also reinforcing that with payment penalties if in fact there are problems. So we start looking at the ecosystem of care as opposed to simply the care that's given on a day-to-day basis.
And is that ecosystem, I mean, to all three of you, getting stronger and healthier? And what I mean by that is, I think in a lot of forums there may be a tendency to say, rah, rah, we're making progress here and there. But if you were to apply a different measuring stick and ask, are those drugs that cured the 96-year-old woman coming online fast enough? Is the process working well enough? Is that science and research system that's connecting to the research you're finding with your patients, is the data sharing going well? If you're up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is one of the great centers of this, a lot of people will tell you we are selfish with our data. We're selfish with information, that there are barriers to trading. Maybe Florida's different, but I'm just wondering, if you were to take a whack at some of the stakeholders in that ecosystem, who would they be? Who needs to up their game?
Well, there's no question. I will share with you the 21st Century Cures Act, which was passed by bipartisan, emphasize bipartisan, passed in the last Congress, is intended to unleash the data. There are a lot of players in the data system. So yes, there is some hoarding of data, but there's also some, shall we say, business cases that don't allow the data to flow as readily as it should. So there's an increasing awareness with consortium collaborations to make things happen. The disease I cite frequently is what happened in multiple myeloma. Multiple myeloma, a number of years ago, there were a lot of silos in terms of research, and through the, not the force of just one person, but largely through the force of one person, knocked heads, brought people together, and now those investigators are collaborating. It can be done and it will be done. And the 21st Century Cures Act has standards in place to try to make, it's what's called data blocking, to try to actually make that happen and change that paradigm so we can increase the speed. I will say that the FDA, for example, is going to look at more of what we call real-world data. But yes, I mean, I will tell you something, folks. I am one frustrated guy. There's very little, this is not new news. This is old stuff. And when you sit in your office in 1980 and you look at systems that don't interact and impede the flow of data, and you come back in 2017 and you still have the same things going on, it's time people stepped up to the plate. It's time that we had control of our records, we could share our information, we can become part of this, that we learn how to actually mine that information to move things through.
A lot of folks are like Susan Love started this movement so that people could share their data, right?
And that it's very, and yes, I've been part of some of those discussions as well. But it's a change, and then protect, but at the same time making sure the privacy protections are in place.
Monica?
I think it's important that we start anchoring the information on the individual. Because I don't know about you, but as we were talking beforehand, I was in Chicago last weekend. I was in Orlando the weekend. We all move around all the time. You know, if our information is locked down inside an office or a facility, it doesn't serve me well as I move. And so whether it's cancer or anything else, if that information follows you, like the Wheatina Bowl used to follow you, remember? Going to school in the morning, remember the old commercial?
Not quite.
Oh, sorry. But the, you know, it needs to be on you. It needs to be in your phone. Yes, it needs to be securely done. But with the changes that we've had in blockchain, in being able to secure information and you being able to control who has access to it and who's opening it, I mean, there's real things happening in health information technology that can really change how that information flows from your office over to Moffitt and anywhere it needs to go.
Monica, can I ask you a question? This may seem out of left field, but I'm kind of haunted by this research project that Columbia University did a few years ago that looked at this massive heat wave that hit Europe. And so it looked at the death rate in cities across Europe. And it found that those elder people that had social networks, people checking on them, kind of clusters of community support, they survived the heat wave at a level that was much higher than other cities where they were just not connected. And I guess I'm very moved by this question of, as people are living longer in their communities, how do we solve? Is there a technology, is there a killer app? Is there some way to kind of create clusters of community and support that feel good and feel right, that people are leaning into as opposed to being a heavy lift? And I just don't know the answer to that. You know, my family comes from small towns. Small towns tend to be more sticky, but I don't know how Tampa is and how other larger urban environments are. Is there something you're doing or models you're seeing where there's clusters of support and concern are coming around?
Yes, and I think that online care coordination and apps that address that, just as our own does at REUNIONCare, I think that those are really important because you do need to make those connections. You need providers talking to patients and to caregivers, and you need all those community-based resources right there, ready to go on that app at the same time.
Is there some cool app you want to tell the audience about right now?
You mean REUNIONCare? Yes, our company, that's thank you. That's what we do for a living. I mean, that's what we do. I'm a social worker. I'm a social worker and a public health, MPH in public health. So I really believe that if we build stronger communities, more integrated communities, that ecosystem builds out of that.
And just so for people know, the REUNIONCare is kind of, and I apologize if I'm really going to grind this up, but is it kind of ZocDoc for social workers? Is it sort of...
That's very nicely put. Thank you. Yes.
Oh, good.
It is very nicely put. Yeah. Yes, because if you think of it, we don't stay in hospitals very long anymore, do we? We go home. We send the caregiver home with all the medicines, all those nursing tasks that they need to do at home now as caregivers. There needs to be a support between that. You just can't, here you go, good luck when you get home. The equipment starts, the home health starts coming in. You need that coordination. You need some kind of safety net. And technology can do that for us. So we build our model to look like Facebook, because let's be honest, who are the largest users of Facebook now? The grandmothers who are looking at the pictures of their grandkids and their great-grandkids. That's what Facebook is turning into in a lot of ways. And so we wanted to make it as easy as Facebook to look at, but a closed system, closed.
Doctor, let me ask you a question just before we go to the audience on the economics of all of this. And one of the other elements is just the financial hits, the choices particularly some elder folks have between taking the drugs that they're getting, buying food, putting it on the table, dealing with other life issues. And we have a lot of turmoil right now in the healthcare and insurance markets. And I'm interested with you on the practitioner side in a community like Tampa. What do you think needs to happen to get that in a healthier place, though? And one, do you agree with that framing of the choices? Is what we're seeing from a lot of elder people. I was in San Diego recently, and you know, the stories were just heart-wrenching and real, that you felt people were being forced with these choices about the costs of this care. What do you think we can do more of to get this right?
Well, like you said, it's very complex. I think that's in the forefront of the major problem with healthcare, how to have coverage, and the price of the new technology is very high. So it's a headache for all of us. In our network, in our group, we have people that are dedicated to the different insurances, and there are a lot of charity groups that help with some of these issues. But there's no question that the network of coverage for the population is a major problem.
Interesting. Do you have any thoughts on this, Len? Because I know you've written about financial toxicity.
It's a disaster area, okay? Plain and simple.
Yeah.
I think
Tell us what you really think.
Yeah, well, that's where I'm going to start from. Now I'll talk about what I really think, okay? Someday, somebody out there is going to say, we need to rebuild the systems from the patient's perspective so that it works for the people that we're supposed to be serving. Because right now, I got to tell you, as a patient, nada. It ain't happening. I can't even get the computer systems in my own, well, I wrote a blog, it's on there, you can go read, I don't want to get too detailed, to talk within the same healthcare system, you know, from point A to point B. A couple years ago, I served on a committee with the National Business Group on Health, and we actually said that the co-pays on these drugs, once you get above, and I apologize, I forget the number, I think $100 a month. Once you get about $100 a month, then there's no reason to have the co-pay, the co-insurance be higher than that, because it doesn't accomplish anything. These drugs are very expensive, and they're going to get more expensive, they're going to get more focused, and it's not going to go away. So we need to take a global look. From the American Cancer Society point of view, I had the privilege of testifying in front of Energy and Commerce on the recent health care bill. I was they had one hearing, I was one of the participants. And I will tell you, we were concerned about access, affordability, transportability, and transferability of that care. It's not, you know, we have some incredible drugs. We can do incredible things. But if a Medicare patient has to pay a 20% copay on a drug, and I appreciate who's hosting this meeting, but I'm sure they're aware of this too and concerned about it, the reality is 20% of $150,000 a year is a heck of a lot of money. And the vast majority of people in this country do not have that kind of funding. So let's face up to the issue. Let's talk about what's reasonable. Let's make this market work for the people who need it, and get past some of the what I would call more parochial interests, such as data blocking, that prevent us. I mean, if I had one thing I would like to see, I'd like to have my medical record in my possession so I can make sure the information is consistent, that it's right, that it's available to those who need it, and I have some control over making sure that
I think that's digestible down to 140 characters, if you want to tweet
that. Good luck.
Thank you, Len. Let me go out to the audience. And we have someone back here. How are you? Good morning.
Just stand.
Good. Tell us your name.
I'm Allison Kazmarek. I am a cancer patient, and I am affiliated with the University of Tampa. I have a question. I really don't think I need that.
Oh, no, we do there are millions of people watching on video.
So you talked about breaking down the barriers for sharing the information and the research. Has anybody ever thought about, you just talked about wanting your information on you. We all have access to our treatment. I would like to know, is there a place where I could say, give me all of my data and I can put it over here and you people can have fun with it?
Well, there actually were some reports at ASCO, if I may.
Yeah, please.
There were reports at ASCO last year that the folks up at the Broad Institute were doing just that. And they presented a paper. And we need to be doing more of that. You know, unfortunately, things move slowly. They don't change overnight. But there's no question that the FDA has opened the door. 21st Century Cures has opened the door. The Office of National Coordinator, which is the White House office that's involved in trying to make all of this happen, is interested in this. And it will happen with time. But then on the other side, there are concerns about privacy issues, and I've written about that also. I mean, a number of us have, to make sure. But I will tell you, I won't bore you now, but see me afterwards. I'll show you the place.
I'd say that just in the third panel we do today, I'm going to actually raise that same question about data sharing, what's going on with Moffitt. This is the former CEO of Moffitt and some of these other big networks. And while I'm not a cancer healthcare expert, I've had the privilege of interviewing so many really fascinating people in this field, including Dr. Susan Love. She's doing something, and she has over 1 million people who have done exactly what you have done. Now, I don't know whether that's gone into something that's helped broaden, you know, within the health research networks, but I would say go look and see what Susan Love has done. But I will raise your same question in the third panel.
Can I make one more real quick comment? ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncology, is doing something along that line also, and they do now have 1 million patient records, but they're trying to data mine. It's the data mining piece that has to be.
And the other element, because the Atlantic has done so many health events, and where I first met Len was in a rare disease and rare cancer forum. And so you're finding many people begin to initiate their own hubs of finding people with similar kinds of pathogens, because as Dr. Blanco said, that more and more of these require larger data sets because the mutations become, you know, at a certain level are constantly mutating cancer. So I just want to lay that out there, that many people who are particularly in the rare side, but it's not all rare, but are creating these hubs. But other comments? Go ahead. Yes, sir.
It's yourself.
How are you?
Good morning.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's me again. Thanks for getting me into the building. I was wandering around outside, lost.
I was doing my steps.
It's over there somewhere. So, thank you all for being here, and thanks.
Tell us who you are.
Oh, I'm Mel Klein. I'm here as a caregiver today. It's obvious I'm a senior citizen, and I don't have some of the concerns I want to ask about because I'm on a wonderful single-payer system called Medicare that is coordinating, since I'm a military retiree, with TRICARE for Life. I don't worry about that. What bothers me, if I get ill, I'm fine. My daughter's 39. She's in her second year of dealing with breast cancer. And I am very distressed at some of the conversation that I hear going on in Washington today. I'm grateful for AARP for standing up for everybody, not just the seniors on this issue, and Dr. Len for your comments about access. We hear a lot about the new technologies. We hear a lot about the new medicine. My concern is on point, access. There are some people, I believe, in Washington, some hard-hearted, callous, uncaring people, sorry, that's the way I see it, who want to change all of what we have now for younger people to at least be able to afford access to some of this medicine. You have somebody that loses a job, loses coverage, can they get it back? No, they have a pre-existing condition. It's like a blot they put on your forehead now.
Right.
And there are people who say it's just too costly to insure people with pre-existing conditions, which I think all of us are dealing with in some fashion as a family member, individually. And we got to get those people out of the insurance and put them on welfare, one representative said.
Right.
If I could have strangled them on the TV set, I would have jumped through there and done it.
Right.
I would like to hear, maybe from this panel and from others, how you feel about the approach on the health care bill, because somebody has to speak up. I guess, Steve, because you're up there in Washington, we'll put it on you. It's your responsibility.
Okay.
To let people know how our folks feel about this.
Thank you.
Pre-existing condition and cancer patients or whatever you're dealing with are not something to be kicked to the side because we're too expensive.
Right.
Somebody needs to help, and maybe $1 billion less for an aircraft carrier or a couple of bombers.
Thank you.
We could borrow a few $1 billion for that. Thanks.
Thank you. So can we have, Monica, please. And we're
there's
going
a-
to
there's
use
a
this as
code-
your wrap up. So yes, go ahead.
Thank you. There's a code word that I want you all to keep on your radar, and it's called age rating. Age rating is a way to discriminate against people that are older and have more conditions. Under the Affordable Care Act, that was brought down to 1 to 3 ratio. Before that, it was 1 to 7, and we're on our way back up. So I implore all of you, please keep that on your radar. Watch out for that. That's a code word for charging people that have health issues more, is what it is. So please keep that on your radar.
Len, quick short form.
Real quick, American Cancer Society, Cancer Action Network, if I may, go to the website, look at what we have said about that very point. Don't have the time to get into it at length here. And also look at the report that we just published last week with regard to the cost of cancer care for people with insurance, Medicare, various scenarios. You may find that interesting.
Rafael, very powerful question. You get the last word.
Well, my feeling is this: if you have insurance, it's to cover whatever problem you have, and to discriminate on age, I think, is perverse. So I hope I never have to use the insurance, that I'm healthy all my life, but the reality is we need it. And it would be an investment to cover everybody, at least a minimum for preventive, to detect illnesses earlier, like breast cancer. Catching any illness earlier is less expensive, the results are better, and I think that would be an investment rather than funding it like we are. We're funding it through the emergency rooms, and that's why it costs a fortune to stop at an emergency room. And that money could be saved and have better results. And I think that's the way to approach it from a patient's perspective. And I agree with you. When patients bring me some of these statements, it says, this is not a bill, and I'm trying to figure out what is it. And the electronic computers, that the software we have is suboptimal.
Right.
I think they should be called beta testing because it makes us inefficient. It's just, and it's being forced on our throat.
Well, thank you. You know, I didn't know where this conversation was going to go, cancer, caregiving, and communities, but every good conversation starts with real candor, and we got that. So please give a round of applause to Rafael Blanco of the Florida Cancer Specialist and Research Institute, Monica Stynchula of AARP Florida and REUNIONCare, and the great Leonard Lichtenfeld, Deputy Chief Medical Officer of the American Cancer Society, and a cool blog, it's Dr. Len's Cancer Blog, right? Dr. Len's Cancer Blog. So please give a round of applause. Thank you guys very much.